May 13th, 1943, 2300 hours. The Bay of Biscay, 40 nautical miles west of Cape Finisterre. Kapitänleutnant Hans-Joachim Hesse stood on the conning tower of U-boat 640, breathing air that tasted of salt and diesel fumes. Around him, the Atlantic darkness pressed absolute and complete. No moon, cloud cover thick enough to block starlight, the kind of night that had protected German submarines for 3 years of war. Below deck, the boat's chief engineer monitored the diesel engines as they rumbled to life, charging batteries depleted by 16 hours submerged. The sound carried across calm water, a mechanical heartbeat that every U-boat commander had learned to trust. Surface at night, run the diesels, dive before dawn. It was doctrine that had sunk millions of tons of Allied shipping since 1939. Hesse checked his watch. 4 hours until first light. Plenty of time to charge the batteries to 80% capacity, enough for another full day's patrol submerged. His lookouts scanned the horizon with binoculars, searching for the silhouettes of convoy ships or the white wake of destroyer escorts. But the sea remained empty, black water meeting black sky at an invisible horizon. The U-boat's diesel exhaust drifted across the conning tower, a familiar smell that meant safety, power, the ability to hunt again tomorrow. Hesse had made this same surface evolution hundreds of times across 2 years of Atlantic patrols. The routine had become second nature. The Allies owned the daylight with their aircraft and radar, but the night still belonged to the U-boats. At 2314 hours, something changed. A sound reached Hesse's ears, faint at first, then growing steadily louder. Aircraft engines, twin engines by the pitch and rhythm. His stomach tightened. Aircraft at night were supposed to be impossible. British Coastal Command flew daylight patrols. Night belonged to the submarines. That was the rule that had governed the Battle of the Atlantic since its beginning. "Aircraft!" the starboard lookout shouted, his voice cracking with sudden fear. Hesse's training took over. "Alarm! Clear the bridge! Dive! Dive!" The lookouts dropped through the conning tower hatch. Hesse followed, pulling the hatch closed behind him as klaxons blared throughout the boat. The chief engineer shut down the diesels. Electric motors engaged, driving the boat downward. Ballast tanks flooded with seawater. But U-boat 640 was a Type 7C, displacing 769 tons surfaced. Physics governed how quickly that mass could submerge. The boat needed 45 seconds to get the conning tower underwater, another 15 seconds to reach periscope depth, a full minute to achieve any meaningful protection. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Hesse braced himself against the control room bulkhead as the deck tilted forward. Water rushed past the hull. The dive angle steepened. 20 seconds gone. 30 seconds. The conning tower was still exposed, a metal island in the darkness that should have remained invisible. Then the night vanished. Light flooded through the conning tower hatch rim, brilliant white light that turned darkness into noon, light that illuminated every detail of the U-boat's hull, light that came from directly above, at an altitude of 3,000 feet. Light that shouldn't exist. Hesse heard the aircraft engines directly overhead now, a Pratt & Whitney Twin Wasp radial sound that meant Wellington bomber. He heard something else too, a whistling sound, falling objects, depth charges. The first explosion detonated 15 meters off the starboard beam, close enough that the shock wave slammed the boat sideways. Metal groaned, cork insulation shattered from the pressure hull, raining down on the crew. Electric lights flickered. A second explosion followed, closer still, and Hesse felt the boat shudder like a wounded animal. The Wellington had caught them in the most vulnerable moment of submarine warfare, surfaced. Engines running, diving but not yet deep enough for protection, illuminated as clearly as if searchlights had been mounted on the conning tower itself. Hesse had just encountered something that German U-boat doctrine insisted was impossible. British aircraft hunting submarines at night with light bright enough to read a newspaper by at 3,000 feet altitude, hunting with precision that turned the darkness from sanctuary into killing ground. The central question that would reshape the entire Battle of the Atlantic had just been answered in 45 seconds of brilliant light and high explosive. If the Allies could hunt U-boats at night, could the submarines survive at all? To understand what happened in the Bay of Biscay that May night, one must first understand what German U-boats were and why they had dominated the Atlantic for 3 years of total war. The Unterseeboot, submarine in English, represented Germany's primary weapon against Britain's survival. Britain was an island nation that imported 60% of its food and virtually all its petroleum. Those supplies crossed the Atlantic in convoys, merchant ships sailing in formation, protected by destroyer escorts. Germany's strategic goal was simple: sink merchant ships faster than they could be replaced, starve Britain into surrender. The Type 7C U-boat, the most common variant deployed during the war, displaced 769 tons, surfaced, and 871 tons submerged. It measured 220 feet in length with a beam of 20 feet. Diesel engines provided 10,000 horsepower for surface operations, giving a maximum speed of 17 knots. Electric motors powered submerged operations at a maximum of 7½ knots, though that speed drained batteries rapidly. The battery limitation defined everything about U-boat operations. A Type 7C carried 2 battery banks, each containing 62 cells of lead-acid batteries weighing a total of 175 tons. At cruising speed submerged, these batteries provided perhaps 16 hours of operation before requiring recharge. At maximum underwater speed, they lasted perhaps 1 hour. Recharging required running diesel engines, which required air, which required surfacing. This fundamental constraint shaped German submarine doctrine from the war's first day. U-boats hunted on the surface, using superior surface speed to intercept convoys and maneuver into attack position. They submerged only to attack with torpedoes or evade immediate threats. After the attack, they surfaced again to pursue the convoy or retreat to safe distance. Surface operations held another crucial advantage. A U-boat's conning tower stood only 13 feet above the waterline, creating a tiny radar signature that early war Allied radar struggled to detect. The submarine presented a small visual silhouette that disappeared entirely in rough seas or darkness. German commanders learned to surface at night, run diesels to charge batteries, and hunt under cover of darkness that Allied aircraft couldn't penetrate. This doctrine worked devastatingly well. In 1940, the period U-boat commanders called Die glückliche Zeit, the happy time, German submarines sank over 4 million tons of Allied shipping. In 1942, after America entered the war, U-boats sank over 6 million tons, including hundreds of ships in American coastal waters, where peacetime city lights silhouetted merchant vessels perfectly. The German Navy deployed U-boats in wolf-pack tactics, multiple submarines positioned across convoy routes, coordinated by radio signals from shore-based command. When one boat spotted a convoy, it radioed position and course. Other U-boats converged. They attacked at night on the surface, using darkness for protection and superior surface speed for maneuverability. Then they scattered, diving only if threatened directly. By early 1943, Germany had over 400 U-boats operational. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the submarine force, calculated that sinking 700,000 tons monthly would strangle Britain's war effort within a year. In March 1943, U-boats sank 108 Allied ships, totaling 627,000 tons. The strategy appeared to be working. British survival depended on defeating the U-boat threat. But how does one hunt submarines in an ocean covering millions of square miles? Destroyers could pursue submerged U-boats with sonar and depth charges, but only if they knew where to look. Aircraft could spot surfaced submarines, but only during daylight, and only if weather permitted visual observation. The night remained the U-boat sanctuary. German submarines surfaced after dark to charge batteries, run at higher speed, and maneuver freely. Allied aircraft didn't fly night patrols over the Atlantic because they couldn't see surfaced submarines in the darkness. The technology simply didn't exist. Except it did exist, and on May 13, 1943. That technology illuminated U-Boat 640 as clearly as theatre stage lights illuminate an actor. The Royal Air Force Coastal Command faced a problem that seemed insurmountable through the first 3 years of war. How do you find a submarine at night? Coastal Command flew thousands of patrols over the Atlantic and Bay of Biscay, hunting U-boats transiting to and from French bases. During daylight, aircraft could spot surfaced submarines from miles away. The distinctive wake, the conning tower profile, the crash dive when the U-boat spotted aircraft first, all these gave pilots clear targets. But daylight patrols covered perhaps 10 hours daily in summer, less in winter. U-boats simply surfaced at night, charged batteries unmolested, and dove before dawn. German commanders grew so confident in nighttime immunity that many stopped posting lookouts, relying entirely on darkness for protection. British scientists and military planners understood the problem's mathematics. A U-boat needed to surface for approximately 4 hours nightly to recharge batteries fully. It needed to spend additional surface time transiting the Bay of Biscay between French bases and Atlantic hunting grounds. This meant every U-boat spent perhaps 30 to 40% of its operational time surfaced, vulnerable if only someone could see it. Radar offered partial solution. By 1942, British aircraft carried ASV Mark II radar, air-to-surface vessel, that could detect surfaced submarines at ranges up to 12 miles in calm seas. But radar had limitations. Rough seas created false returns. Skilled U-boat commanders learned to recognize radar signals using primitive detection equipment called METOX, named after the French company that developed it. When METOX detected radar emissions, the U-boat dove immediately. More fundamentally, radar could detect a submarine but couldn't guide an attack. Aircraft needed visual contact to drop depth charges accurately. At night, by the time an aircraft closed to visual range, even with bright moonlight, the U-boat had vanished beneath the surface. What Coastal Command needed was artificial daylight, a light source powerful enough to illuminate a submarine from attacking altitude, bright enough to eliminate shadows and reveal the target clearly, reliable enough to function in combat conditions, and light enough that a twin-engine aircraft could carry it along with depth charges and fuel for 8-hour patrols. The solution emerged from an unlikely source. Squadron leader Humphrey de Leigh, a Royal Air Force officer who had joined the service in 1915, during the First World War, had spent the interwar years thinking about maritime patrol problems. Leigh understood that searchlights existed, powerful carbon arc searchlights used for anti-aircraft defense and naval operations. But existing searchlights weighed thousands of pounds and required external power generators. In 1940, Leigh began experimenting with modified searchlights mounted in aircraft. He needed something powerful enough to illuminate targets at 3,000 feet altitude, the typical depth charge release height. He needed instantaneous activation because submarines could dive in 45 seconds. He needed a light that wouldn't blind the pilot or create reflection glare off the aircraft's own wings. The technical challenges were substantial. A searchlight bright enough for the mission required 24 million candle power, producing light intensity comparable to 10,000 automobile headlights focused into a narrow beam. Such a light generated tremendous heat that could melt mounting hardware or start fires in the aircraft. It required electrical power that strained aircraft generators. It weighed 450 pounds, including mounting equipment, reducing weapons payload. Leigh solved these problems through persistent engineering. He designed a retractable mount that deployed the searchlight beneath the aircraft's wing, eliminating wing reflection. He developed heat-resistant housings and ventilation systems. He worked with electrical engineers to create power systems that could activate the light instantly without overloading aircraft generators. By late 1941, Leigh had a working prototype. The Leigh Light, as it became known, produced a beam visible for 10 miles, bright enough to read newsprint at 3,000 feet, focused into a circle approximately half a mile in diameter when projected onto the ocean surface. The light could be activated by the pilot with a single switch, reaching full brilliance in less than 2 seconds. But having the technology and deploying it operationally were different challenges. The Leigh Light required modified aircraft, specially trained crews, and new tactical procedures. It required solving the problem of how to use radar to guide the approach, then switch to visual attack in the seconds before the U-boat dove. Most critically, it required absolute operational security. If German intelligence learned that British aircraft could hunt submarines at night, U-boats would simply remain submerged longer, recharge batteries less frequently, and reduce operational effectiveness, but survive. The Leigh Light's value depended on surprise, on catching U-boats that believed themselves safe in darkness. Through 1942, Coastal Command installed Leigh Lights on Wellington bombers and trained select squadrons in night attack procedures. The crews practiced coordinated attacks. Radar operator guides the pilot toward the target. At approximately 1 mile range, pilot activates the Leigh Light. The submarine appears in brilliant illumination. Pilot adjusts approach and releases depth charges. From light activation to weapon release, perhaps 20 seconds. The training was dangerous. Several aircraft crashed during night practice runs, pilots blinded temporarily by their own searchlights or disoriented in the darkness. The tactics required precision, flying at low altitude over water at night, conditions that killed experienced pilots with small mistakes. By May 1943, Coastal Command had approximately 40 aircraft equipped with Leigh Lights, flying from bases in southern England and Gibraltar. German U-boat command had no idea these aircraft existed, and on the night of May 13th, Kapitänleutnant Hesse surfaced U-boat 640 directly into the hunting ground of a technology that would transform the Battle of the Atlantic from German offensive to Allied victory. Squadron 172 operated from Royal Air Force Station Chivenor in North Devon, England. Established in April 1942, the squadron flew Vickers Wellington Mark 8 aircraft, twin-engine bombers adapted specifically for maritime patrol and anti-submarine warfare. Each aircraft carried a crew of 6, pilot, co-pilot, navigator, wireless operator, and 2 air gunners, who doubled as observers during submarine hunts. The Wellington Mark 8 differed substantially from bomber variants. Engineers removed the ventral gun turret to save weight and installed ASV Mark III radar in a streamlined nose housing. The bomb bay was modified to carry 6 depth charges, each weighing 250 pounds, and filled with Torpex explosive, 30% more powerful than standard TNT. Additional fuel tanks extended patrol endurance to 8 hours, allowing the aircraft to reach hunting grounds 300 miles from base and loiter for several hours before returning. The Leigh Light installation required extensive modification. Engineers mounted the searchlight assembly beneath the starboard wing, approximately 15 feet from the fuselage. The light housing measured 30 inches in diameter and extended 24 inches forward of the wing's leading edge when deployed. A retraction mechanism pulled the assembly flush against the wing during daylight operations or when not in use, reducing drag. The searchlight itself consisted of a carbon arc lamp surrounded by parabolic mirrors that focused the beam into a concentrated column of light. The carbon electrodes required replacement after approximately 45 minutes of continuous operation, though actual usage rarely exceeded 30 seconds per sortie. Power came from a dedicated generator, driven by the starboard engine, producing 24 volts at 120 amperes, enough electrical current to light a small town. Operating the Leigh Light required precise coordination between crew members. The radar operator monitored the ASV scope, watching for surface contacts. Submarine returns appeared as distinct blips separate from wave clutter, though distinguishing submarines from fishing boats or debris required experience. When the operator identified a promising contact, he guided the pilot toward it using radio calls. Contact bearing 090 degrees, range 8 miles. The pilot flew toward the contact while descending to attack altitude, typically 3,000 feet. This altitude provided enough height for the Leigh Light beam to spread to useful diameter while remaining low enough for accurate depth charge delivery. The navigator calculated approach angle to account for wind drift and the target's estimated course and speed. At approximately 1 mile from the target, When the submarine remained invisible in darkness, the pilot activated the Leigh Light with a switch on the control yoke. The light required 2 seconds to reach full brilliance, a delay caused by the carbon arc ignition sequence. During those 2 seconds, the pilot flew blind, trusting the radar operator's guidance completely. When the light activated fully, the submarine appeared in stark illumination against black water. The Wellington's approach angle was critical. Too steep and depth charges would overshoot, too shallow and they would undershoot. The pilot had approximately 15 seconds to adjust course, confirm the target was indeed a submarine and not a fishing vessel or allied craft, and release weapons. The depth charges dropped in a stick, falling from Bombay in rapid sequence. They were fitted with pistol fuses set to detonate at 50 feet depth, calculated to cause maximum structural damage to a diving submarine's pressure hull. A perfect attack placed all 6 depth charges in a pattern surrounding the submarine, creating overlapping shockwaves that could rupture hull plating even without direct hits. After weapon release, the pilot extinguished the Leigh Light immediately and climbed away, turning hard to avoid flying through his own weapon blast. The rear gunner watched for explosion flashes, counting detonations and noting their position relative to where the submarine had been visible. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Squadron 17. 2 crews trained extensively before operational deployment. Night flying over water required skills beyond standard aviation training. Pilots practiced low-altitude navigation using only instruments, learning to trust altimeters and artificial horizons when natural horizon disappeared in darkness. They practiced emergency procedures for engine failures or electrical problems that would leave them without radar or searchlight. The radar operators attended specialized schools where they learned to interpret ASV displays, distinguishing submarine contacts from surface ships, waves, or weather phenomena. They practiced guiding pilots toward targets they themselves couldn't see, using only the electronic blips on phosphorescent screens. Most critically, entire crews practiced coordinated attacks in simulation. Then, during actual night flights over the Bay of Biscay, they flew patrol patterns called corkscrews, systematic searches covering assigned areas. They learned to work smoothly together, each man performing his role in the complex sequence that turned radar detection into weapon delivery. The psychological preparation proved as important as technical training. Night patrol over the Atlantic meant hours of monotony punctuated by moments of intense danger. Crews flew in darkness so complete that many reported disorientation, losing sense of whether the aircraft was climbing, descending, or flying level. They flew through weather that bounced the aircraft violently, making radar observation difficult and accurate navigation nearly impossible. They flew, knowing that U-boats sometimes carried anti-aircraft guns, quad 20mm cannons that could destroy a Wellington before the pilot released depth charges. They flew, knowing that mechanical failure meant ditching in an Atlantic that killed from hypothermia in minutes. The Bay of Biscay, where most patrols occurred, had water temperature averaging 54 degrees Fahrenheit. Survival time in those waters rarely exceeded 30 minutes. Yet Squadron 172 maintained operational readiness rates above 80% through spring 1943. Aircraft flew nightly when weather permitted. Crews rotated through patrol schedules that had them airborne 3 or 4 nights weekly. Ground crews maintained the complex Leigh Light electrical systems, replaced carbon electrodes, and repaired the temperamental ASV radar sets that frequently malfunctioned in damp Atlantic air. By May 1943, Squadron 172 had flown 147 Leigh Light patrols. They had illuminated 42 surfaced submarines. They had attacked 31 of these with depth charges. They had achieved confirmed kills on 7 U-boats and probable kills on another 9. The technology worked, the tactics worked, and German U-boat command still had no comprehensive understanding of what was killing their submarines in darkness. The Wellington that illuminated U-boat 640 on May 13th carried the identification letter P. Peter and was piloted by Flight Lieutenant James Wright, a 26-year-old former solicitor from Manchester who had joined the Royal Air Force in 1940. Wright had completed 12 Leigh Light patrols, participating in 3 attacks that resulted in possible kills, but no confirmed sinkings. Wright's crew had taken off from Chivanor at 2100 hours, climbing to patrol altitude and setting course for their assigned sector in the Bay of Biscay. The weather was perfect for hunting. Calm seas, heavy cloud cover blocking all ambient, light, visibility absolutely zero without artificial illumination. Conditions that U-boat commanders considered safe for surface operations. At 2300 hours, Sergeant Peter MacDonald, the radar operator, detected a surface contact bearing 270 degrees at range 9 miles. The return signal showed characteristics consistent with submarine. Small, solid, moving at moderate speed. MacDonald called the contact to Wright, who banked the Wellington onto intercept heading. The approach took 4 minutes. Wright descended to 3,000 feet while Navigator Flying Officer Thomas Anderson calculated wind correction and estimated submarine course. The U-boat appeared to be heading southwest at approximately 12 knots, typical speed for a surfaced submarine transiting on diesel engines. At 1 mile range, Wright activated the Leigh Light. The ocean surface appeared in brilliant white illumination, and there, caught perfectly in the center of the light beam, was U-boat 640, its conning tower clearly visible, wake streaming behind it, lookouts scrambling down the hatch. Wright had perhaps 12 seconds before the submarine's conning tower submerged. He adjusted course slightly left, accounting for the submarine's movement during the light's 2-second ignition delay. Anderson called range estimates: 800 yards, 600 yards, 400 yards. At 300 yards, horizontal distance, Wright pressed the bomb release. 6 depth charges dropped in sequence, each separated by approximately 60 feet. The Wellington's rear gunner, Sergeant William Thomas, watched them fall, dark objects tumbling through the light beam toward black water. Wright extinguished the Leigh Light and pulled the Wellington into a climbing turn. The first depth charge detonated 6 seconds after release, creating a flash visible for miles. 5 more explosions followed in rapid succession, overlapping shock waves creating a water column that rose 100 feet into the air. Thomas, watching from the rear turret, reported seeing the submarine's stern rising at steep angle before disappearing in the explosion pattern. He reported oil spreading across the water's surface, visible briefly before darkness returned. He reported debris, what appeared to be wooden planking or cork insulation floating in the disturbed water. Wright circled the area at higher altitude, waiting to see if the submarine would resurface. MacDonald monitored radar for any surviving surface contact. After 15 minutes, showing no sign of the U-boat, Wright set course for base. The attack had lasted less than 1 minute from light activation to weapon release. U-boat 640 survived, but barely. The first depth charge detonated 30 meters off the port beam, close enough that the shockwave cracked pressure hull plating and shattered every light bulb in the boat. The second exploded directly beneath the stern, lifting the entire aft section and jamming the diving planes in full-down position. Hesse fought to maintain control as the boat plunged toward crush depth. The chief engineer reported water entering through the stern gland, not catastrophic flooding but enough to indicate serious damage. The electric motors screamed at maximum power, trying to counteract the jammed diving planes and level the boat. At 180 meters depth, 20 meters beyond the Type 7C's rated maximum, the diving plane's mechanism suddenly freed. Hesse ordered emergency ballast blow, forcing compressed air into tanks and driving the boat toward the surface. They leveled at 100 meters, deep enough to avoid immediate detection but shallow enough that the damaged hull could withstand pressure. Hesse ordered silent running. All non-essential equipment shut down. Crew members sat motionless, breathing slowly to conserve oxygen. They could hear destroyers searching above them, the distinctive ping of British sonar echoing through the hull. But the destroyers were searching too far north, and after 2 hours they moved away. At 0300 hours, Hesse cautiously surfaced, expecting to find Wellington aircraft waiting, but the sky remained empty. He radioed base in France, reporting the attack and requesting permission to return for repairs. Permission granted, U-640 limped towards Saint-Nazaire at reduced speed. never surfacing for more than 30 minutes at a time. They reached port on May 15th. Engineers inspecting the damage found cracked hull plates, damaged diving plane mechanisms, and a stern gland that would require complete replacement. The repairs took 6 weeks, but the physical damage was less significant than the psychological impact. Hesse filed a detailed report describing the attack, aircraft appearing without warning in complete darkness, searchlight bright enough to illuminate the boat as if in daylight, depth charges following within seconds. His report reached U-boat headquarters in Paris, then Berlin, where Admiral Dönitz read it with growing concern. This was not the first such report. Through April and May 1943, 7 other U-boats had reported night attacks by illuminated aircraft. 3 boats had been sunk, 4 had been damaged, and German naval intelligence had no explanation for how British aircraft were finding submarines in complete darkness. The success of Leigh Light attacks forced immediate changes in German U-boat operations. On June 3, 1943, Admiral Dönitz issued new operational orders to all Atlantic submarines. U-boats were instructed to cross the Bay of Biscay submerged during daylight hours and surface only at night, but even night surface operations were now restricted to areas where aircraft activity was minimal. Submarines were ordered to maintain maximum alertness when surfaced, with lookouts scanning continuously for any sign of approaching aircraft. At first sound of aircraft engines, boats were to dive immediately without waiting to identify the threat. The standing order that had governed submarine operations since 1939, surface equals safety at night, was officially abandoned. The impact on German submarine effectiveness was immediate and severe. Type 7C U-boats, designed for surface transit and submerged attack, now spent most of their operational time submerged. This reduced maximum speed from 17 knots surfaced to 7 knots submerged. It reduced patrol range by forcing boats to operate on battery power, which required more frequent charging stops. It reduced time on station in Atlantic hunting grounds because more time was consumed in slow underwater transit. Most critically, reduced surface time meant reduced battery charging time, which meant less submerged endurance during actual combat operations. A U-boat that previously could patrol submerged for 16 hours, while hunting convoys now had batteries charged to perhaps 60% capacity, providing only 9 or 10 hours submerged before requiring another surface charging session. Dönitz understood the mathematics. If U-boats couldn't surface safely at night, their operational effectiveness decreased by approximately 40%. If U-boats couldn't maintain previous sinking rates, Britain would win the convoy battle through sheer industrial production, building merchant ships faster than submarines could sink them. German naval intelligence worked desperately to understand the British night attack capability. Initial theories focused on infrared detection, assuming British aircraft carried heat-sensing equipment that detected diesel exhaust from surfaced submarines. U-boats were ordered to minimize exhaust visibility by adjusting engine mixture and reducing surface speed. Other theories proposed that British radar had achieved breakthrough improvements, detecting submarines at night with precision that made visual contact unnecessary. U-boat. A command ordered installation of improved METOX radar detectors and instructed submarines to dive immediately upon detecting any radar emissions, even if no aircraft were visible or audible. The actual cause, searchlight illumination guided by radar, remained unknown to German intelligence until captured British aircrew finally revealed the Leigh Light's existence in late 1943. By then, the technological advantage had shifted decisively to the Allies. Coastal Command expanded Leigh Light deployment through summer 1943. Squadron 172 was joined by Squadrons 459, 502, and 179, all equipped with modified Wellingtons carrying the searchlight systems. Additional squadrons flying Consolidated Liberator bombers received Leigh Light installations, providing greater range and endurance for Atlantic patrols. The production numbers reflected Allied industrial capacity. By September 1943, Coastal Command operated approximately 120 aircraft equipped with Leigh Lights. By December, that number reached 180. Each aircraft flew an average of 12 patrols monthly, weather permitting. This meant approximately 2,000 Leigh Light patrols monthly across the Atlantic and Bay of Biscay. The tactical impact showed clearly in sinking statistics. In May 1943, the month Leigh Light attacks became widespread. Allied forces sank 41 German U-boats, the highest monthly total of the war to that date. In June, 37 more U-boats were destroyed. In July, 37 again. By contrast, U-boats sank only 58 Allied merchant ships in those 3 months combined, compared to 108 ships sunk in March alone. The turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic is generally dated to May 1943, precisely when Leigh Light operations reached full effectiveness. The technology didn't win the battle alone. Improved convoy tactics, better sonar, long-range patrol aircraft closing the Atlantic gap, where submarines had previously operated beyond air cover. All these factors contributed to Allied victory. But the Leigh Light achieved something uniquely devastating to German submarine operations. It eliminated the night as sanctuary. It forced U-boats to remain submerged when they needed to surface. It turned the hunter into the hunted during hours when German commanders had previously considered themselves safe. Flight Lieutenant Wright completed 47 Leigh Light patrols before being rotated to training duty in December 1943. His crew participated in 12 attacks using the searchlight system, achieving 3 confirmed kills and 4 probable kills. Wright survived the war and returned to his law practice in Manchester, rarely speaking about his service until interviewed by the Imperial War Museum in 1986. Kapitänleutnant Hesse returned to patrol duty in July 1943 after U-640's repairs were completed. He made 2 more Atlantic patrols, both conducted almost entirely submerged due to new operational restrictions. On his 3rd patrol, in October 1943, U-640 was sunk by depth charges from HMS Starling, a British sloop. There were no survivors. The Leigh Light remained in operational service through the war's end, though its importance diminished as improved radar and other technologies provided alternative night detection methods. Total production reached approximately 400 units installed on various aircraft types. The system is credited with direct involvement in 43 confirmed U-boat kills and an estimated 60 additional attacks that resulted in damage forcing submarines to abort patrols. In the final accounting, the Leigh Light represented something more significant than another weapon system. It demonstrated that technological innovation could fundamentally alter tactical reality. German U-boat doctrine, developed through 2 decades and validated by 3 years of successful operations, collapsed in weeks when faced with a technology that made its core assumption, nighttime surface safety, obsolete. The light that caught U-boat 640 at 3,000 feet on May 13, 1943, illuminated more than a single submarine. It illuminated the transformation of the Battle of the Atlantic, from German offensive to Allied victory. The Leigh Light's operational impact can be measured with precision through records preserved in British National Archives and German naval war diaries. Between April 1943, when the system entered widespread service, and December 1944, when improved radar made searchlight illumination less critical, Coastal Command aircraft equipped with Leigh Lights flew approximately 17,000 patrols over the Atlantic and Bay of Biscay. These patrols resulted in 638 confirmed sightings of surfaced U-boats at night. Of these sightings, 412 resulted in attacks with depth charges or other weapons. 43 attacks achieved confirmed kills. Submarines definitely sunk with evidence including debris, oil slicks, or survivor testimony. An additional 97 attacks were classified as probable kills or serious damage based on explosion patterns, sonar contacts lost, or U-boats that never returned from patrol after being attacked. The statistical impact extends beyond direct kills. German operational records, captured after the war, reveal that U-boat patrol effectiveness declined sharply beginning in May 1943. The average Type 7C submarine, which had previously spent approximately 60% of patrol time surfaced, reduced surface operations to less than 30%. This reduction directly decreased operational range, patrol endurance, and time spent in Atlantic convoy hunting grounds. The economic calculation was equally significant. Germany produced approximately 1,050 U-boats during the war, of which 785 were operational Type 7 variants. Each submarine required approximately 30,000 man-hours to construct and cost approximately 2 million Reichsmarks, equivalent to approximately $800,000 at wartime exchange rates. Each boat required a crew of 44 men, trained at considerable expense and time. Against this investment, Germany sank approximately 3,000 Allied merchant ships, totaling 14 million tons during the entire war. The majority of these sinkings occurred between 1940 and mid-1943, before Leigh Light operations and other Allied anti-submarine improvements became effective. After May 1943, monthly sinking rates dropped by approximately 70%, while U-boat losses increased dramatically. The human cost was staggering on both sides. Of approximately 40,000 German submariners who served during the war, approximately 30,000 died, a casualty rate of 75%, the highest of any military service in any nation during World War II. The majority of these deaths occurred after May 1943, as Allied anti-submarine warfare reached peak effectiveness. Allied merchant mariners suffered proportionally. Approximately 30,000 British merchant seamen died during the war, most killed when their ships were torpedoed in the Atlantic. An additional 5,000 American merchant mariners died, along with thousands more from other Allied nations. The vast majority of these deaths occurred during the war's first 3 years, when U-boats operated with relative impunity. The Leigh Light contributed to reversing this casualty pattern. By making night surface operations dangerous, it forced U-boats to remain submerged longer, reducing their ability to find and attack convoys. This directly saved merchant ships and the crews aboard them. Conservative estimates suggest that Leigh Light operations, combined with other anti-submarine improvements introduced in spring 1943, prevented the loss of approximately 500 merchant ships and perhaps 15,000 mariners' lives in the war's final 2 years. The technology also influenced aircraft losses. Coastal Command lost approximately 2,000 aircraft during the war, many to operational accidents rather than enemy action. Night patrols over the Atlantic were particularly dangerous, with aircraft lost to navigation errors, mechanical failures, or simply disappearing without explanation into the darkness. Leigh Light operations actually reduced some of these losses. The searchlight, while primarily a weapon system, also served as navigational aid. Crews could use it briefly to verify position over known landmarks or check altitude over water. Several documented cases exist of aircraft avoiding crashes by using the Leigh Light to illuminate the ocean's surface when altimeters failed or pilots became disoriented in darkness. Squadron leader Humphrey de Verdelais, the system's inventor, received the Distinguished Flying Cross in June 1943 for his contribution to anti-submarine warfare. He continued working on aviation technology improvements through the war's end, developing improved lighting systems for aircraft carriers and experimental infrared detection equipment. After the war, he worked as aviation consultant and died in 1975 at age 83, having witnessed his invention's impact on naval warfare. The Leigh Light manufacturing program demonstrated Allied industrial capacity. The searchlight assemblies were produced by British Thomson Houston Company and General Electric Company facilities in England. Production reached peak of 40 units monthly by late 1943, requiring approximately 12,000 man-hours per unit, including electrical components, mirror assemblies, and mounting hardware. This production occurred simultaneously with Britain building aircraft, ships, tanks, and all other war materiel while under bombing attack and blockade. The ability to develop, test, produce, and deploy a complex new weapon system within 18 months from initial prototype to widespread operational use demonstrated organizational capability that Germany increasingly couldn't match as the war continued. The Leigh Light's operational life was relatively brief. By early 1945, improved centimetric radar sets allowed aircraft to detect surfaced submarines with enough precision that visual identification through searchlight became less necessary. Additionally, German U-boats began surrendering in large numbers as Allied forces advanced across Europe, reducing the number of submarines requiring hunting. The last confirmed Leigh Light attack occurred on April 27, 1945, 11 days before Germany's surrender, when a Wellington of Squadron 172 illuminated and attacked U-boat 1054 in the North Sea. The submarine survived and surrendered 3 days later. By May 8, 1945, the Battle of the Atlantic was over, won by Allies through combination of technology, tactics, and industrial production that Germany couldn't overcome. The psychological impact of Leigh Light attacks on German submarine crews exceeded the weapon's direct physical damage. Interviews conducted with surviving U-boat commanders after the war, preserved in American and British naval intelligence archives, reveal consistent patterns of traumatic response to night illumination attacks. Kapitän Peter Kremer, commander of U-333, described his first Leigh Light encounter in March 1944 in his post-war memoir. "We were surfacing to charge batteries in what we believed was safe darkness. Suddenly the night vanished. A light brighter than noon sun caught us perfectly. I could see every detail of the deck, every man on watch, as clearly as if theatre spotlights had been aimed at us. We dove, but depth charges exploded around us before we reached 20 meters. The terror was not just the explosions, but the absolute helplessness of being illuminated, exposed, with nowhere to hide." Kremer survived the war, and his testimony, along with dozens of similar accounts, reveals how Leigh Light attacks created fear disproportionate to the actual kill rate. The psychological burden of knowing that surfacing at any time, in any conditions, might result in sudden illumination and attack, degraded crew morale and operational effectiveness even when actual attacks didn't occur. German submariners developed superstitions around surface operations. Some crews believed that running engines at certain speeds attracted British aircraft. Others insisted that surfacing during specific moon phases or weather conditions was safer, despite no statistical evidence supporting these beliefs. These superstitions reflected desperate attempts to find patterns that might predict safety in an environment that had become fundamentally unpredictable. The operational restrictions imposed after May 1943 created cascading problems for U-boat effectiveness. Submarines required approximately 4 hours surfaced to fully charge batteries. New regulations limited surface time to 2 hours maximum, and only in areas believed safe from air attack. This meant batteries rarely charged beyond 60 or 70% capacity, which reduced submerged endurance during actual convoy attacks. U-boat commanders faced impossible choices: remain submerged and preserve battery power, but move slowly and risk losing contact with convoys. Surface to chase convoys at higher speed, but risk Leigh Light attack. These tactical dilemmas, absent during the war's first 3 years, contributed to declining German submarine effectiveness. The training pipeline for replacement U-boat crews also suffered. By 1944, German submarine training emphasized defensive operations and survival rather than offensive tactics. New crews learned to dive quickly, to recognize aircraft sounds at maximum distance, to operate at extreme depths to avoid depth charges. This defensive mindset, while practical given operational realities, represented complete reversal from the aggressive hunter mentality of early war years. British and American aircrew who flew Leigh Light patrols developed their own psychological responses to night hunting. Flight Lieutenant Robert Dale, who completed 63 Leigh Light patrols with Squadron 459, described the experience in a 1992 interview. "The moment of light activation was always intense. You're flying in absolute darkness, trusting radar and instruments. Then you flip the switch, and suddenly there's a submarine, a real enemy vessel with men aboard, caught perfectly in your light. You have perhaps 10 seconds to attack before they disappear. The responsibility was enormous." Dale's account reveals the moral complexity of anti-submarine warfare. Unlike bombing missions against industrial targets or even naval surface combat, submarine hunting involved killing men trapped inside steel tubes underwater, men who often had no chance to fight back or escape. Many Allied aircrew found this psychologically difficult, even while understanding the strategic necessity. The Leigh Light's effectiveness created unexpected diplomatic complications. Neutral nations, particularly Spain and Portugal, protested when British aircraft illuminated vessels in international waters. Several documented cases exist of Leigh Light aircraft illuminating Spanish fishing boats or Portuguese merchant ships, creating incidents that required diplomatic resolution. These cases highlighted challenges of technological warfare that made target identification difficult until illumination occurred. German responses to Leigh Light attacks evolved throughout 1943 and 44. U-boats began carrying additional anti-aircraft weapons, including quad 20mm cannons, specifically to engage aircraft during the vulnerable seconds after light activation. Some U-boat commanders ordered crews to remain on surface and fight rather than dive, gambling that anti-aircraft fire might destroy the aircraft before depth charges were released. These surface fights occasionally succeeded. Records document 11 Coastal Command aircraft shot down by U-boat anti-aircraft fire during Leigh Light attacks between June 1943 and March 1944. However, this tactic also resulted in U-boats being damaged or sunk while remaining surface to fight, and German Naval Command eventually discouraged the practice. The technological race continued through the war's final years. Germany developed radar-absorbent coatings for conning towers, attempting to reduce radar visibility. They experimented with schnorkel devices, retractable air intake tubes that allowed submarines to run diesel engines while remaining submerged at periscope depth. These innovations came too late and in insufficient numbers to reverse the strategic situation. Britain, meanwhile, improved Leigh Light technology with more powerful lamps, better mirror assemblies, and refined tactical procedures. By late 1944, some aircraft carried dual searchlight systems, allowing backup if the primary unit failed. Others mounted lights powerful enough to illuminate targets from 5,000 feet altitude, providing additional safety margin for attacking aircraft. The final months of the war saw German U-boats retreating to Norwegian and Baltic ports, where Allied air superiority made even port operations dangerous. Leigh Light-equipped aircraft participated in attacks on submarines in port or near coastal waters, though by this stage the Battle of the Atlantic had already been decisively won. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, approximately 150 U-boats remained operational. Most were ordered to surface, fly black flags, and sail to designated Allied ports for surrender. British aircraft, including Leigh Light-equipped Wellingtons, escorted these submarines to ensure compliance. The sight of German U-boats sailing surfaced in broad daylight, surrounded by Allied aircraft that didn't attack, symbolized the complete reversal of power that had occurred since 1943. The story of German U-boats surfacing to charge batteries and being caught by Leigh Lights illuminates a principle that extends beyond World War II naval warfare. It demonstrates how technological innovation can render established doctrine obsolete, how assumptions of safety can become vulnerabilities, and how the advantage in warfare shifts not just through superior numbers or courage, but through superior adaptation to changing realities. German U-boat doctrine in 1941 was not foolish or poorly conceived. It was based on accurate assessment of existing technology and Allied capabilities. Surface operations at night were genuinely safe when Allied aircraft lacked night detection capability and effective illumination systems. The doctrine that evolved from this reality, surface at night to charge batteries and hunt convoys, was logical and effective. The failure came not from initial doctrine but from inability to adapt when that doctrine's foundational assumptions became invalid. When Leigh Light attacks began in spring 1943, German Naval Command faced the same choice that confronts any military organization when technological change undermines established practice: adapt quickly and completely, or cling to familiar doctrine while making incremental adjustments. Germany chose incremental adjustment. U-boats were ordered to be more careful when surfacing, to maintain better lookouts, to dive faster when aircraft were detected. But the fundamental operational pattern, surface regularly to charge batteries, remained unchanged because submarine technology required it. Type 7C U-boats couldn't operate effectively without regular surface charging. Therefore, they continued surfacing, despite mounting casualties. Britain, by contrast, demonstrated organizational flexibility that allowed rapid development and deployment of new technology. The Leigh Light went from initial concept in 1940 to widespread operational deployment in 1943, a remarkably short timeline for complex military technology. This required cooperation between inventors, military planners, industrial manufacturers, and operational squadrons, all working toward common goal, despite bureaucratic obstacles that could have delayed implementation. The human dimension of this story deserves emphasis. The men aboard U-boat 640 on May 13, 1943, were not abstractions or statistics. They were individuals, many barely 20 years old, serving in one of the war's most dangerous assignments. When Wellington P. Peters' Leigh Light illuminated their submarine, those men experienced terror that came from sudden understanding that their assumptions about safety were wrong. Similarly, the aircrew of P. Peter were not distant technicians pushing buttons. They were men flying in darkness over hostile ocean, trusting complex technology and their own training to find and attack enemies who would kill them without hesitation if positions were reversed. The moment when Flight Lieutenant Wright activated the Leigh Light required courage, skill, and acceptance that the attack might fail or that the illuminated target might fight back successfully. War reduces human beings to opposing sides, yet both sides consist of individuals facing similar fears and similar mortality. The Leigh Light. Attacks succeeded not because British aircrew were braver or German submariners less skilled, but because one side possessed technological advantage that the other couldn't counter quickly enough. The broader lesson extends to understanding how wars are won. Military historians often emphasize major battles, dramatic turning points, brilliant generals making strategic decisions. These elements matter, but wars are also won through accumulated advantages in technology, logistics, industrial production, and organizational adaptation. The Leigh Light represents all these factors. It was technology, a searchlight powerful enough to illuminate submarines from attacking altitude. It was logistics, deploying that technology to operational squadrons and maintaining it in harsh maritime conditions. It was industrial production, manufacturing hundreds of units while simultaneously producing all other war material. It was organizational adaptation, developing new tactics and training crews to execute them effectively. Most significantly, it was sustained advantage. One Leigh Light attack might sink one U-boat, but 17,000 patrols over 18 months created cumulative pressure that degraded German submarine operations to the point where they could no longer threaten Allied convoy system. This sustained application of advantage, rather than dramatic single victories, determined the Battle of the Atlantic's outcome. The story concludes where it began, in darkness over the Bay of Biscay, but the darkness of May 1943 was different from the darkness of May 1940. In 1940, that darkness protected German submarines while they hunted Allied shipping with near impunity. In 1943, that same darkness concealed British aircraft hunting German submarines with technology that turned night into deadly illumination. Kapitänleutnant Hesse, surviving the attack on U-640, only to die 5 months later when his submarine was sunk by conventional depth charges, represents thousands of German submariners caught in technological transition they couldn't control or escape. Their courage was genuine, their skill real, their sacrifice total. Yet courage and skill proved insufficient against opponents who possessed technological advantage and industrial capacity to deploy it effectively. Flight Lieutenant Wright, surviving the war and returning to civilian life, represents thousands of Allied aircrew who fought the Battle of the Atlantic from aircraft cockpits rather than ship decks. Their contribution was essential to victory, yet often overlooked in historical accounts that emphasize surface combat or strategic bombing. The men who flew night patrols over the Atlantic, hunting submarines in darkness, deserve recognition for sustained courage over months and years of dangerous operations. The Leigh Light itself, a relatively simple device of mirrors and carbon arc lamps, demonstrates that technological advantage need not involve exotic science or massive expense. Sometimes the critical innovation is applying existing technology in new ways to solve specific problems. The components of the Leigh Light existed before Squadron Leader Leigh assembled them into effective weapon system. His contribution was recognizing how those components could be combined to address the problem of finding submarines at night. This principle, that innovation often comes from novel combination of existing elements rather than invention of entirely new technologies, has relevance beyond military history. It suggests that solving complex problems may require not just new discoveries, but creative application of known capabilities in ways previously unconsidered. The final accounting of the Leigh Light's impact must acknowledge both its successes and its limitations. It contributed significantly to Allied victory in the Battle of the Atlantic. It saved merchant ships and mariners' lives. It accelerated German submarine defeat. Yet it was one tool among many in a complex campaign that involved convoy tactics, long-range aircraft, improved sonar, code breaking, and sustained industrial production. No single weapon system won the Battle of the Atlantic, but the Leigh Light, by eliminating the night as submarine sanctuary, removed one of Germany's key advantages at a critical moment when the battle's outcome remained uncertain. That contribution justifies remembering both the technology and the men who developed, deployed, and faced it in the darkness over the Atlantic 80 years ago. The light that caught German U-boats at 3,000 feet revealed more than submarines. It revealed the transformation of warfare through technology, the courage of men on both sides facing deadly odds, and the principle that advantage in war comes not just from fighting harder, but from adapting faster to changing realities. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.